What is your never interrupt an enemy while they are making a mistake moment? I was accused by a neighbor of reversing out my drive and hitting his car. He gave me the date and time I had allegedly done it and pointed to a small scrape on my car that supposedly matched perfectly the location of the dent on his. This was 7 weeks after the alleged event, by the way. I said it wasn't me, but told him to contact his insurance and we'd see what they said. A few weeks later, I get a letter from my insurance asking what had happened, to which I responded with the date I had bought my car and updated my insurance, 2 weeks after the supposed bump. He never spoke to me again, but I used to give him a cheery wave every time I saw him glowering at his window. I was in an accident driving through Kentucky, and the lady was just obnoxious. She asked if I was staying in a hotel. I said yes. She asked if I was worried about them giving my room away. I said no. And she grinned triumphantly and said, "So you have a credit card?" No visible damage, but she insists on calling the police. The officer arrived and she ran up and gave him a hug. I asked how he knew her and he grimaced and said, "She's my aunt." I asked for another officer and he said nobody's getting a ticket and the report will say no visible damage. "I'll give you a copy before you leave. If you want to talk to my boss, you can, but the thing you're worried about, you're not the one who should be worried about." I did speak to his boss later, who said if she files against your insurance, send them to me. A few weeks later, I get a call from my insurance company, and I start panicking and start explaining that the other driver was related to the officer. The insurance rep explained the officer included all 3 conflicting stories she told him. "We just want to ask for your description of the accident and your permission to file a complaint on your behalf." I don't know what happened, but I think back to that stupid grin, and I feel contentment. I have a somewhat similar story. I was backing out of my driveway and this crazy lady who lived in my neighborhood pulled into my driveway and hit my car. Luckily, there was no damage, but she wanted to exchange insurance info. Later that day, I get a call from her insurance agency asking me what happened. After I told them, there was a slight pause followed by, "She pulled into your driveway. We'll call you back." This was probably around 2001 or so, and they have yet to call back. Residual schadenfreude. Years ago, I worked extremely hard on preparing a presentation for a tech conference. It would be my first speaking gig. I was nervous after I practiced. I refined. I got advice. I practiced some more. My manager was generally a nasty woman, but she was supportive of this, though she never once saw or heard my presentation. We traveled to Vegas. It turns out it was a far greater demand than they expected, so they moved us to the main stage room. They were expecting about 500 plus walk-ins. I was tense, nervous after. Well, immediately prior to the start, she noticed a very well-known media person and their photographer sitting in the front row. She got all excited and insisted that she was going to co-deliver it. She even went so far as to put her name on title slide. So, I, of course, was fuming. We go on stage. She does a decent intro, and then I start in. She keeps interrupting, so I just let her run with it. It reminded me of a morning show. A bunch of people with overwhelmingly fake smiles talking over each other. This was a deeply technical topic with a live demo. She fumbled each slide worse than the next, and then she got to the live demo slide and froze. I had the wherewithal to let her die. It was gloriously brutal. We had let's say, confrontation after. I left within 2-3 months. She got fired shortly after. Oh, and the media people she was prancing for left immediately before the start. I think they were just sitting there from the prior session. Perfect. There will be plenty more opportunities to give presentations. Getting to play a role in a terrible person, publicly humiliating themselves and potentially ruining their career is much more rare. Had the same thing happen, although at a much smaller level. I was due to give a technical presentation and Q&AQ, and I got changed last minute to a panel discussion, so 6 of us on stage. Introduction started, not by me, and was clear very early on that they were not prepared at all, and they just let me do my thing. Q and a time comes and I don't talk after every question, forcing them to step up and fumble a bit before saying something like, "I think that this question is best suited for." And then I would take over. It was pretty funny, and the people I talked to after definitely knew what was going on. I am so mad for you, and for the attendees. Did you ever get a chance to properly give your presentation? When I practiced family law, I saw this often on the stand. Turns out, if your opponent is crazy, most of the time, all you need to do to reveal that is give them a microphone and mildly question their story. The best, however, was in motion to withdraw hearings. For context, I hated these hearings. I dreaded them. I already felt like a failure for having to withdraw from a case 95% of the time because the client wouldn't pay me, but sometimes because they turned out to be uncooperative and/or combative with me. They were not difficult to win, however. Inevitably, if I simply asked the ex-client when and how they intended to write their retainer, they'd start listing off excuses about how they don't and never will have the money to do so. It's heartbreaking, but it also proves my point. The clients who were uncooperative, however, were the best. I'd read off a list of times they cursed me out, ignored my advice, and threatened me and my staff. Then just wait. You could watch their blood boil on the stand, followed by completely unhinged justification as to why no lawyer could reasonably work with this person. Mr. Jones, can you explain why you threatened to shove a phone up my paralegal's ass? As if she called you again. She calls me every fucking week with another fucking thing that I have to do. You're supposed to be handling my case. It's why I hired you. I don't have time to be searching through my emails and getting bank records and bring you papers every damn day. And every time my retainer is empty for like a day, she calls to remind me to refill it. I've got other things to pay for, like the damned child support you put on me when I left. How rude can you be, right? Right. I swear, if I have to hear her damned voice one more fucking time, I'm going to drive over there and slap the shit out of her. Your Honor, I rest my case. This explains why my lawyer loves me low. She even forgave me part of her fees. It surprises me that you dread these motions, though. First time I've ever heard a lawyer complain about it. Apparently, family law gets you the most unhinged clients, though. Family law gets you the most unhinged clients. The phrase I've heard bandied about was that criminal court is where you see the worst of society on their best behavior, and family court is where you see the best of society on their worst behavior. Roommate's ex abandons their vehicle in front of my house. I tell them to please move it, or I will have it towed. Vehicle suddenly has 2 flat tires. Ex files police report claiming my roommate and I had slashed their tires. Waited until X made their statement to the police about how we had slashed their tires, and that is why they couldn't move his vehicle, and filed a claim against us in small claims court. Provided police and the court copies of my and our neighbor's DocuCam footage, showing the X arriving in the middle of the night to slash their own tires. Cherry on top, X shows up in court wearing the same shirt as in the video. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Roommate and X had only been dating a few months. X turned out to be a grifter and was dating several people at the same time and using each of them for food, shelter, money, etc. I got involved when my roommate was out of town and the soon-to-be X just sauntered in. Apparently they had learned the code to the garage door, made themselves a sandwich, showered, slept, etc. I thought my roommate had come home early, but when I texted them, they were still out of state. The ex left to go out and I changed the garage code. The vehicle wouldn't start, so they just left it there thinking it would be okay. Roommate and a few of the other people the ex was dating find out about each other and they all dumped them at once. I ask the ex to please move their car or I will have it towed. I give them 2 weeks. Later on I learned that the ex was having a mental breakdown and they made some very poor decisions at that point. They broke into some of the other people's houses when they weren't home to do laundry, eat, sleep, and did some other things that got them in trouble with the law, but are irrelevant to this story. The ex had no proof that anyone had slashed their tires. The cops just came to the door of me and our neighbors to see if there was any footage. There was, and they closed the case, I guess. They never talked to me again about it. The court case was small claims. The plaintiff has to pay a fee, file a form, have a summons issued to the defendant, and then you both show up in court with your evidence. The ex had no evidence other than a long list of real and perceived grievances with my roommate, but no actual proof, so the judge dismissed the case. I never got to show the video evidence to the judge, but I did share it with the clerk on their lunch break, and they were the one who pointed out that the ex was wearing the same shirt. This tale is made by that sweet cherry. At my current job, part of my duties is to do trailer audits, make sure people are unloading, loading safely, and I was training a new member for the position to do the job. After a few weeks, it turns out that the other person wasn't doing any aspects of the job. Instead, they were just mingling like it was a cocktail party. When asked why they weren't doing anything, they say it was because they were never trained. Well, turns out that due to past complaints about this particular person, management put them on a PIP that if they got any type of training, they were to have a piece of paper documenting what kind of training it was, who trained them, and management sign off with all parties' signatures. When they pulled the file that said they were indeed trained in all duties of the job, they just sat there silent and was fired. They were fired because they pulled the same stunt in every department of the building, and mine was their last chance. Sounds like they got paid for a couple months to dick around. Likely a win in their book. Guy stole a presentation from me. This is 25 years ago. We hated each other. When he started presenting, I realized I had made a huge error. Didn't say anything. Let him get through it. Ask him about the error. He couldn't answer. This was in front of Koo. Got fired. Not for just that. He was an overall douche. This was before everyone was on peaks. Had one printer in one room. That reminds me of a joke about a guy and his chauffeur pulling something similar years ago. The guy was an expert who was traveling the country, speaking to businesses and universities. One day his chauffeur said, "I've heard you give this speech so much. I bet I can do it better than you can." The guy said, "Ark, the folks at the next stop don't know me or what I look like, just my name. So you pretend to be me, and I'll wear your hat and be the chauffeur." So the chauffeur gave the speech, and gave it really well. Got a standing ovation. Then it was time for the question and answer part. The first question was an extended, in-depth one that took a couple of minutes to get through because of how specialized it was. When it was over, the chauffeur looked down and said, "Man, in all my years of speaking, that was the simplest question I've ever been asked." Just to let you know how easy that question is. My chauffeur is in the back of the room, and I'd like for him to stand up and answer it. This was in front of Koo. I always read this term as if there was a pigeon in a business suit who's in charge of the company. In Scotland, a coo is a cow. I imagined the puzzled expression of a bovine chewing the cud. I bet he thinks you set him up. The same kind of person that will steal your food and then snitch on you for making your lunch super spicy. To this day, after 37 years of life, it blows my mind that people actually steal lunches at work. I let the lady who changed lanes into me run her mouth about how I rear-ended her before pulling the cop aside to show him my dashcam footage. A woman sideswiped my wife, trying to pass on the right in front of the police station, and kept going 1,000 feet or more down the street. The cop showed up and went to that woman first, and she lied about everything. Said the accident happened where she stopped, said my wife made an illegal turn. All made up. When the cop came to talk to us, he wouldn't even listen to our side of the story. I told him what she said made no sense based on the damage to the car, and his response was, "Well, you see all kinds of things." I told him check your parking lot cameras, and said there was no need to check them because the accident didn't happen in front of the police station, etc. I came so close to yelling at the cop. He tickets my wife, end of story. Later that night, he calls my wife, says he decided to check the parking lot cameras after all, and that my wife's version of the accident was the more truthful one. He took care of her ticket and tickets the other driver. Very frustrated about that. It's amazing he even admitted he was wrong. He decided to check the camera on a solved case. Yay, right. I bet someone in security saw the footage and sent it around the station, so he had to correct the report to save his own answer. I'd bet someone saw his report and decided to check the cameras since it was so close to the station. Imagine the embarrassment of not being able to correctly solve a case directly in front of your own station, hence the reluctant call by the ticketing officer. Cop, I was right, but you were more right. I did the same thing, but for another dude. Right lane was gradually conned off due to fixing some potholes. Lady went all the way up to the last second and then cut this dude off. He hit his horn and she brake-checked him. Bam, this lady was. I don't even know. On the phone, hysterical about how this guy was screaming and threatening her, and she didn't feel safe. I waited for the cops to do their thing and then stepped up. They said, "No, we got what we need." I said, "Watch this. Uno reverse card." The scary part is, they didn't care about the evidence. I once came upon a 2-car crash moments after it happened. They had both passed me going up a hill, crashed on the other side. When the police came, they talked to one couple and let them go, then came to talk to the other couple whom I was sitting with. Found out the first couple said she was driving. Thing is, when I came up, she was in the passenger seat, and he was running away through a field. too many cops are lazy. The scary part is they didn't care about the evidence. A few days ago, I watched a bit of court coverage of the Travis Rudolph trial, the cross-examination of the lead investigator, to be exact. I was beyond baffled how little effort she apparently had done in terms of looking for evidence, going so far as to claim that looking for evidence without cause was a waste of taxpayer money, and apparently key witnesses lying about, not having guns, and deleting evidence from their phones wasn't enough of a cause for her to go digging. Closure of cases and arrests are what they're rated on, not out of times they're right. Policing is very broken. I really need to get a dashcam. Best time to get a dashcam is before you need a dashcam. Kinda like a toilet plunger. I'm not an expert, but I like my Viofo R129 Duo Pro edit. I'm just gonna leave the Turbo Duo Pro plunger as a thing. Can't be worse than the poop knife. Rip riff, it's been a good ride. Not an enemy, but in retrospect should have been. I work as a teacher, and we had an ex-manager guy who decided to get into teaching late. He had lots of pretty horrible habits, eating other people's lunches, perving on the female teachers, squeezing people's shoulders painfully hard as a matey's gesture. But the habit that this story is about is how he tried to use weaponized incompetence to get people to do his tasks for him. None of it was really important. He just seemed to enjoy talking people into doing things for him, so he comes up to me one day with a speeder stick in his hand. Apparently it has a copy of a previous year's exam. That it was his responsibility to update and edit it. He'd taken the file home, and his daughter had done the update. Really, dude, roping family into doing your paid government job for you. He wanted me to copy the file from the USB back into the server, replacing the original file he'd copied. It was literally click and drag between the USB and the file server. I flat out refused and said it was part of his responsibility, and I was too busy with my own task. He proceeds to loudly and publicly proclaim to the entire staff room that I didn't understand how difficult it was for people of his generation to learn computer technology, and that I really needed to help him out. That he was currently doing a computer course, but this, dragging a file between two folders, was too difficult for him to sort out. I let him go on for about a good 5 minutes about how horrible I was for not helping the poor, helpless old man out, until I just as loudly asked him how the hell did you get the original file from the server onto the aside in the first place. You could have heard a pin drop in that staff room. He walked off and copied his own goddamn file. Good on you for not taking shit. I can only imagine how his teaching is like if he's like that. When a co-worker who I hated got fired a few weeks after I decided to stop fixing his mistakes, even if it impacted a client. On the one hand, you don't want to be a snitch, but on the other hand, you really shouldn't cover up other people's stupidity. I had a co-worker who should have been fired a year earlier, but I kept stepping in. On at least 2 occasions I told myself that I had to shield the job from liability when his personal and professional incompetence got people physically hurt. So I stepped in and smoothed things out, instead of letting him dig his own grave. When he eventually got fired, it took him 6 months to forget my phone number. Don't cover for stupid kids. Back when I was at university, our final year was a big multidisciplinary group project where students from different courses formed teams to build games over the course of the year. I joined a team where I had basically 2 roles because my degree was split in focus. Somewhat stupidly, it was a mistake to sign up for it, but oh well. Another guy on our team had the same, so between us we were supposed to be doing the work of 2, just split into 2 areas. He did nothing. I took one half of his work, someone else took the other half. What work he did was shit quality and unusable and had to be redone. It was a mess. We tried talking to him about it repeatedly, but to no avail. He just didn't put in the work. The warning sign was probably that this was his 5th year of a 3-year degree. The dude took 2 attempts at every year. Part of our submission was a massive report where we were each supposed to break down what we did on the project, how and why. We left his section as basically a single sentence stating name contributed to the project. That was more than he deserved, but at the same time, it essentially called out explicitly that he did almost no work, including on the shared document. We didn't tell him that section was there, but we were all in that same doc writing, and we were all expected to contribute. He would have seen it if he'd opened it to write anything during the entire process. He flipped out when he found out after submission. He did not graduate. I do not feel sorry for him. Yeah, been there, fuck that. Group homework in college is a joke. Pretty sure a few of my earlier courses had some group assignment M, but most of the profs had some system of checking, who contributed what either with an anonymous survey at the end, personal interviews about the contents of the assignment after, or we were expected to present our own section. That contributed to the group's work, and one prof that would give an F if you were caught covering for someone who didn't do a damn thing. If someone didn't do it, they were screwed. Not mine, obviously, but the Space Shuttle Challenger engineer that knew it would explode, Bob Eberling. He repeatedly said the cold weather would cause a failure despite pressure from NASA administration. He describes them as making the best decision of his life, refusing to sign the paper indicating he approves of the launch, forcing his boss to do it. At the governmental inquiry after the death of the astronauts, NASA said the engineers signed a paper approving the launch that day. Which, yea, that's true, but worded as deceptively as can be. Bob then stood up, walked to the hearing, said that he personally refused the launch, but was overruled to the stunned members of the hearing. The government fired the NASA execs and made Bob head of the investigation. Yeah, been there, fuck that. Group homework in college is a joke. Pretty sure a few of my earlier courses had some group assignment but most of the profs had some system of checking, who contributed what either with an anonymous survey at the end, personal interviews about the contents of the assignment after, or we were expected to present our own section. That contributed to the group's work, and one prof that would give an F if you were caught covering for someone who didn't do a damn thing. If someone didn't do it, they were screwed. I was a lead developer in a small company producing IoT devices. My manager hired his friend from his previous company, a guy who was super arrogant and knew everything better. Theoretically, my opinion on the development of the project should be decisive, but neither my manager nor his buddy cared about it. I tried to talk to the manager about the problems with the new colleague, but he brushed me off. The new guy, being so brilliant, was given one important component of the system to do. Of course, he made it clear that he didn't need any help from me. Weeks and months passed. In the meetings, his component was always in the last phase of testing. But I had access to the Git repository, and I saw how messy it was. No one asked me for my opinion, so I didn't say anything. I waited. The deadline has come, the release of the product. And of course, nothing works. Higher management became interested in the case, and my manager could only avoid being fired in one way. He fired his buddy. A few weeks later, I left the company. That was over a year ago, and as far as I know, the product still hasn't hit the market. As a keeps worker at the time, speaking to a father with police present in a case concerning substance use, and the father admitting being high on meth, and thinking the cops were there to arrest his daughter for stealing his meth, admits to me that she stole it because he let her have some, because he let her have some, because he let her have some, because if I didn't give it to her, she'd go be a prostitute to get it. Just an entire 45-minute conversation with the guy having no apparent awareness that he had just told a keeps worker and two cops that he, 1, is currently high on meth, 2, routinely provides meth to his daughter, 3, had his meth to his daughter, 3, had his meth in his trailer behind him, 4, his daughter had been at the trailer with him. While meth was in the trailer, 5, the meth was stored where she could easily access it, and she knew where it was, 6. He used meth with her. Just unfathomable levels of I'm struggling to believe this conversation is happening, and afraid if I say anything he'll come to his senses and shut up. During my very long and exhausting divorce, my ex-husband kept insisting he was ready to settle. We would schedule a conference with my lawyer and I, and then pushed papers around the table for 2 hours. He would just argue over petty details rather than actually discuss anything. This happened a few times. I was incredibly frustrated because I genuinely walked into this wanting to compromise so it would be over quickly. But that was never an option. Note that I hired a lawyer and he did not. He was convinced he could do it on his own better. So after a few rounds of this, I got the impression that he was trying to waste my money until I could no longer retain my lawyer, and then he thought he would have the upper hand. I made less than half of what he did at the time, and my lawyer's retainer fee wiped out my entire savings, so it was a very real concern. My suspicions were confirmed when one day, as we were walking out of my lawyer's office, he told me this, word for word, while chuckling. I passed this on to my lawyer, who actually cackled and told me, let him. It was then that I learned that we were 6 months out from being married 10 years, and at that point, I would be entitled to a sizable part of his pension upon retirement. She let him play his games for 6 more months without saying a word, and then finally took our case before a judge 5 days after our 10-year anniversary. Not only did I get part of his pension, but she also got the judge to order him to pay almost all of my lawyer's fees. The beauty of it was that it 100% his fault for playing games. Good lawyer. Good lawyer. She earned her pay, especially so because she got the husband to pay it. That lawyer cleaned his sorry ass out. Good shit. I used to live in an apartment that had a very old lease. College students basically passed this place's lease down like inheritance until it came to us. And legally, the landlord could only increase the rent yearly by a small fraction of the current lease's rent. The exceptions to this were if the apartment was being renovated, in which case it would be her responsibility to accommodate us while renovating, or if it had been vacant for a year between leases. She knew our lease's rent was extremely low, and so wanted to get rid of us and jack up the rent on a new tenant. She sent us a letter about 2 weeks before our lease would be renewed, saying she was renovating and we'd have to leave. Well, it happened my roommate was not just a college student, but a law student. And he happened to know she had to give us a lot more notice than that. So we plainly told her we weren't leaving and she'd be welcome to take us to court. Which she did. She told the judge she wanted to renovate, and the judge asked her for the new floor plan and a cost estimate of the proposed renovation. She had none of those things. When the judge asked why, she said she'd only decided to renovate a week prior. When the judge asked why she'd taken this decision after the legal deadline, 6 months' notice are required to end a lease, she said she was only renovating so she could start a new lease on the property. The judge literally face-palmed at her response, dismissed the case, and renewed our lease with no rent increase for the year, since she hadn't presented us a new one with enough delay to contest it. We were just sitting there with our mouths open, bewildered that she could have been dumb enough to say the quiet part out loud straight to the judge. My ex-boss was a complete douche in every aspect. We worked as surveyors using drones to scan and survey large areas, and he would go out of his way to get the cheapest and least reliable drones to do the job. One of those drones was this awful fixed wing, shaped like a plane with only one propeller, that you launched using this shit slingshot system that had a 50% chance of just launching the thing nose down into the ground. I told him this thing's a piece of shit. I even recorded my launches with it so he could see this thing was a piece of shit. But he insisted I was just a shit pilot who couldn't take off a duty to save my life. After 3 crashes, 2 rolls of duct tape and a few arguments, he decides to come with to the next big job we have and just do it himself. Now, the turnover times for these jobs were insane. The man had zero concept for how long shit takes, so he promised the clients the data the very next day, which meant that everything would have to go perfectly the day of the flight, with 0 delays, so I could process the data overnight and have it ready for them the next day. No room for errors, no second chances. Every morning it was make or break. So we get to the site in the early morning, and I'm completely hands off. Normally, I'd pack a second drone for when this one inevitably kamikazes into the earth, but this time I decide he needs a slice of humble pie. I watch as he sets up the drone, runs through the checks, loads it onto that awful fucking slingshot, and gets ready to pull the trigger. I take a few steps back, take out my phone to record, and watch the fireworks. He pulled the lever and the bungee cord released. It whipped the drone 10 feet into the air at Mach 2 before the thing nose-dived right into the ground, breaking off one of the wings. After about 2 seconds of teetering on the ground, the drone's autopilot thought to itself, hey, that was a launch, wasn't it? And automatically kicked the propeller into high gear, shattering it against the cold, unforgiving ground. He just watched the whole thing happen with a dead look in his eyes. Once the drone settled down and the death throw stopped, he picked up the drone, walked back to us, and said, well, shit. The 4-hour drive back to the office was completely silent, and our boss had to call the client and explain why we wouldn't be delivering the data to them on time. We had another job we had to do the next day, so they'd only have it next week. I could hear the client screaming to him over the phone from the next room. Needless to say, we never used that drone again. He never stopped buying shit drones, but when I told him they were shit, he believed me. Not my story, but several years ago, my older brother was fighting for custody of his son with his ex-wife. As the first custody hearing date approached, they were exchanging unpleasantries over text, and my brother ended up saying something along the lines of, I'm not continuing this conversation. "I will see you on the 15th, the ex-wife told him. The ex-wife told him. The ex-wife told him. The hearing is on the 25th, Dumbers." So of course, instead of correcting her, my brother just allowed her to keep thinking it was the wrong date, and she missed the first hearing entirely. It became the first of many mistakes she made in the court system that eventually led to my brother and the woman who is now his second wife winning full custody of his son. I have my own custody battle. When I split with my ex-wife, one of the main reasons she gave for me not being able to spend time with my daughter was because she was convinced I was going to take her to my parents' house, and my mum liked to smoke, only cigarettes, but still, in the house. We arrived in court, and I met her and her lawyer in the reception area. The three of us struck up a conversation, mostly about the case, and in the course of that conversation, the fact that my mum had passed away a month earlier happened to come up. The look on her lawyer's face. It was clear this was the first time she'd heard about my mum passing. My ex-wife, who was very aware of it, hadn't mentioned it to her, and this was obviously quite a vital part in their whole argument. Within 30 minutes, her lawyer had drafted an agreement about how we'd share custody of my daughter. I signed it, and we got the judge to effectively rubber stamp it for us. But should have saved it for court. Her lawyer. Something mum smoking you. Pulls out mom's obituary judge. I'm awarding OC 100% custody because ex-wife is clearly an idiot. Yeah, if only I'd realized that the lawyer didn't know, I would definitely have done that. I'd frame a picture of those two texts and send it to her on the anniversary of their divorce. I once worked for a project in a call center, and we constantly had call on our asses about call quality. They would review every call and send the report to you and your supervisor, who would sign off on it, then send it back to court. If you got 2 reports under 90%, there'd be a warning and you'd be fired after 4. Now this was all done via email, so I'd save all my reports, just in case. My first couple weeks, I got dinged with a warning, but everything after that I maintained at least 95% or above according to the reports I was getting. One week I noticed a few agents were getting let go. Agents I always thought were good. At the time, the project was looking for supervisors, and these were the guys you would want. I found out they had all been hit with bad reports which led to the firings. Then one day he calls me and lets me know I'm fired for several reports saying I scored insanely low scores. Just one problem, I had the report saying those were all over 90%, and I told her I had them. The HR rep asks me to forward all of them to review, and I do so. A couple hours later, I get another call from Heshte. I get another call from Harrier saying I'm being reassigned to another project with better pay. Turned out the K was fudging the reports after the supervisors signed off on select agents because they had certain agents they were friends with and wanted them to get the management positions. Even worse, everyone in management knew and didn't care. The project got shut down, and the fired agents were all brought back and placed in better-paying projects like I was. I was doing a mortgage for a French guy in Miami Beach that had a French realtor. Even though both were completely fluent in English, she frequently did asides in French, having no idea I spoke the language. When they settled on a property and we were riding the elevator down from the condo, she told him that, look, these guys are scumbags and they're going to screw you over, and I have a much better person that you can work with, even though the way foreign investment works is identical throughout the state. Towards the end of the ride, I say to the guy in fluent French that we would be happy to compare our proposal with whatever her people could come up with, and it's his choice. But certainly, we would like to work with him on this and any future investment. He starts laughing his ass off, and she was completely mortified. He went with us and fired her as his agent. On the spot! When I was training a friend I hired at a store I used to manage, some customers were talking shit about us in Maltese of all things. My friend was surprised to have a use for the fact that she was fluent in it and started asking them if there was anything the matter in their language. They got super embarrassed and left. I didn't even mind losing the sale. Bonus points for a rare language. Had similar happen with Daivai, the language of the Maldives. There was a huge scandal a few years back when a couple were getting married in the Maldives, and the celebrant was calling the bride a fat white whore and stuff like that during the ceremony. Shit went south when the couple got the videotapes translated when they got home. Great story, but I'm imagining you being fluent in French, having a French client, and then thinking, you know what, I'll just not bring it up in case I can flop it out later like an anime villain. Not as uncommon as you might think. It's easier to stick to the one language you start with, and legally safer to speak in the language the contract will be in to avoid misunderstanding. Also, you may have a great grasp of a French, but if you are used to selling in English, shifting the language to the client's language moves the ball to their court. Not everything translates directly, and you'd be giving up the home field advantage when it comes to using idioms and anecdotes. Having never met you before, I'm proud of you. The firing was in English. My work partner was in the elevator with us and poker-faced the entire exchange until we shook hands with the French architect and made our pleasantries and plans to meet the next day. Then he just lost his shit. Like tears of laughter. He had dealt with her a couple of times to no avail, and later called all of our banker allies with the comeuppance. Apparently, everyone hated her and reveled in that. We got a referral out of that guy too. I think there's justice in that. I feel that way anyway, to be a fly on that wall. My favorite stories are people making an ass of themselves cause they erroneously assume other people don't speak their language. I'm working on a job site and the architect is there one day. I've been given some light fixtures for the sconces in a leasing office lobby. The fixtures are meant to be hung from a ceiling. They can't be installed on a wall. I attempt to convey this to the architect, but he brushes me off and just tells me to follow the prints. I turn to the apprentice and say, "Well, you heard the man. Put them up." A bit later, we hear the crashing of glass. The architect asks what was that. I said, "Your light fixture," as I picked up a broom and dustpan to go clean up. Edit. Told the apprentice to clean it up, of course. As an electrician as well, this happens so often. Wrong drawings given to us, we bring it up, but get told, don't go off, spec sounds good, chief. I'll follow it exactly, and you can tell me when the customer wants it changed. From a GC standpoint, this action puts the liability for the cost entirely on the design team and owner. I've given this direction to subs knowing full well how stupid it seems, but if I try to make a change, then I'm not following contract documents and can be financially liable for unforeseen issues. If I stop work to get correct information, then my company may be liable for the schedule impact. Let the architect and engineers see their own problem and figure it out. It's sort of a malicious compliance. That's exactly it. I always tell my apprentices that as soon as you deviate from the method statement, even if it's wrong, you are completely liable for anything that goes wrong. It's so much easier to just do it exactly as they want. And when they complain, just show them what they wrote. Should have picked up the broom and dustpan and handed them to the architect. If only that's how the world worked. David Sedaris has a great story about riding the Paris subway next to some American tourists who thought no one around them understood their language. When I was a teenager, a cousin of mine, Jenny, had a fight with her mum, Jackie. The fight was so intense that Jackie beat Jenny severely, so she called Mom and Dad asking for help and asked to live here for a while. At the time that sounded horrifying, but we quickly learned that Jenny was full of fucking shit. Jenny was a drama queen, loved to stir up trouble, lied constantly about basically everything, and Jackie never laid a hand on her. We had heard rumors, but dismissed them and believed her, until one incident. Mom always kept a few frozen pies in the freezer, just in case company came over. Jenny took a pie from the freezer one day, ate the entire damn thing, and when Mom came home, she got angry because those pies were for company. She asked Jenny who ate the pie, and she said, "I did." She yells for me. I come into the kitchen. She asks if I ate the pie. I said no, and get yelled at for eating the pie. Jenny then proceeds to launch into telling this overly elaborate tale about how I took the pie and ate it, just to get her in trouble. She went on for like 3 minutes, and Mum just kept getting angrier and angrier at me, while I couldn't help grin like a madman. 3 minutes later, she finishes her story, and I point something out. It was a coconut cream pie she ate. I despise coconut. I hate it and will never eat it. Mom knew this, and the realization hits her. Jenny gets a look of horror in her face. She got grounded for a month. The look of both of them is seared in my mind. Makes me smile when I think of it. The funny thing is, she tried it again 2 months later, this time eating a chocolate cream pie, but Mom didn't believe her. Never tell the same lie twice. Elim, Gara. I was working as a cub reporter in a small town and had done a piece on stray dog menace in some area. Plenty of dogs had attacked kids in a short while. The dog lovers of the town took that piece as a "I hate all dogs" article. They shared it in their WhatsApp group and started talking trash about me. What they did not know was that the admin of the group ran a dog shelter, and a few months back I had done a piece on the shelter, so I was in the group too. At one point, they began scheming that they'd cook up stories about me lying in the story and complain to the publication. Mind you, these are upstanding citizens, doctors, lawyers, senior executives. So their word had weight against a rookie reporter. I just showed the chat to the editor. He had a good laugh about it. Never knew what happened after that, but hours later, they stopped bitching about me. The admin of the group apologized to me separately. He didn't need to, but never did tell them that I was a part of it. I worked in a countrywide company and needed something done by a peer in another office. She was very uncooperative and was arguing with me that she should not do what I was asking because it was not the correct procedure. It was, in fact, the correct procedure as per my boss, who was her boss. But before I could tell her where I had gotten my instructions, she took it upon herself to send me a very condescending email, cuxing her boss and mine. She was clearly trying to put me on the spot for being wrong. I just waited until both her boss and mine told her that I was right, and I was just sitting there thinking, why are you making this so hard on yourself, girl? As I was being fired from a job, the district manager requested we record the conversation. He thought I was gonna be very upset, so I obliged. Then when he started to tell me why I was being fired, he started with, "You are gonna be graduating college soon, and we want to make sure we get ahead of you leaving us." I very calmly asked. He sent me the recording right after he said that. Then later that day, I called a lawyer. I now have no student loan debt. Edit. To give context, I was able to win litigation due to breach of contract. I don't feel like the internet is the right place to go into further detail. The local electoral district association meeting was expected to be a largely pro forma renomination of the previous candidate, my boss, when a former candidate decides to throw his hat in the ring. Starts giving this long diatribe about how much support he has locally. He lost his prior race by 3x the margin we lost by, and starts rambling. You know when someone starts talking faster instead of making a point? It was that. Boss texts me to say you can feel free to interrupt and move for a vote. I reply, 1 sec, I have a feeling he's gonna say something stupid, right as he let slip a racial slur against my boss. For context, boss was Indian prep, candidate was Chinese. Both second generation. District didn't lean heavily in either direction. Needless to say, once he realized what had happened, he made the smart choice and withdrew. Preface. I have always done my paperwork in Blue Pilot 2 pen, not chilling. It's a very distinct color and hard to cover. Also, this will be a small novel. At one of my previous jobs, I had just gotten my machine-making product ready for packing. The only problem was the outer lip diameter was just too big, think 0.1 of an inch off. Nothing I did could get the diameter down. It was just too hot for the plastic to be formed smaller without cooling the die further, which was not then possible quality, and my supervisor quibbled about it for a while. It was decided and hoped the product would further shrink in storage as it continued to cool and set. So quality tech signed off approving the variants. Several months down the line, a couple customers complain lids aren't fitting right sometimes. Later found out only with hot foods or in hot environment. I get called into the front office for a final warning. A big quality alert. They ended up refunding anyone who bought product made by me and a copy of the quality paperwork. Quality tech is saying she never approved me running that product with the quality variants and has a copy of my paperwork proving it. I waited until everyone spoken their piece, pulled out my pen, flipped the write-up over and wrote, "I refuse to sign this write-up because I do not deserve it." I then told them to go pull every quality sheet, every training sign-off, and even my job application and job offer, and notice I write in blue ink. The quality sheet in front of me is a photocopy because all my writing is in black, not blue. Plant manager threw the write-up into the shredder and told me to go home for the day. I had already worked a 12-hour shift before this, and forget about this happening. He did not look amused. There was a new quality tech the next night I went in. Told her, if you work in any field that requires regular paperwork, use a blue pen. I do the same thing. I work in aerospace manufacturing with a stringent quality process, and I exonerated myself because I'm the only machinist who writes in blue. Amazing how our stories are parallel like that. But yours is 3x more epic. This job wasn't anything that important. This was thermoforming little plastic cups, like what you might get sauce or something from a restaurant in. Manufacturing, but we made trash, not aviation parts. I'm a little lost. Did the previous quality tech fake your signature? No, Kay changed what they wrote on the original sheet, probably whiteout, then photocopied it to make it look like it was the original document. But because he only used blue ink, the document in front of him was not the original, as his signature was now black. I reminded my ex-wife the divorce court was the next day and was invited to get fucked. So I went by myself. She failed to appear and pissed at the judge so that he asked what would be my desired outcome for assets and custody of the kids. He wrote down whatever I wanted, and I could hear her screams when she read the orders from 3,500 km away. My ex-co-worker was POS, and he was using I have a baby, so I need certain shifts more. But that didn't matter if he randomly decided to get wasted on alcohol and white powder. He would call me in the middle of the night to cover his morning shift, etc., and I would cover his shift, and yet, when I needed him to cover my shift, which I would ask him days, even weeks in advance, he would pull, I have a baby card. Christmas season comes and I ask him if I can take 31st of December morning shift so I can spend New Year's evening with my boyfriend, go somewhere, celebrate, etc. He got almost mad because I asked. His words were, no, I have a baby. It's his first New Year's Eve. I have to spend it with him and wife. Fine, whatever. And then night of 30th comes. I was awake at 2 a.m. gaming or watching Netflix. I felt my phone vibrate, and look who it is, my co-worker who is wasted somewhere and needs his morning shift covered. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and in my drawer. I didn't answer. Next morning I had 50 missed calls from him, few from other co-worker and 10ish from my boss. He didn't show up for work. He got fired that day. Work environment became so much healthier. I was an attorney. Other side sways my client alleging he missed work for formula protected reasons and his termination was wrongful. I look up plaintiff in public records database and see that he had court dates on all of the days he'd missed work. Instead of immediately confronting plaintiff to give him time to change his story, I depose plaintiff and have him walk me through every minute of every day he missed work. He leaves out the court part. A month after the deposition, after the time passes when the deposition can be corrected, I send plaintiff's lawyer printouts of the court records with the relevant dates highlighted, along with the paperwork to voluntarily dismiss the case and a letter stating that any further action in the case will result in a motion against him for bad faith litigation. Don't hear a peep from the lawyer, but get the dismissal order from the judge a week later. There's a thing in law enforcement legalese called a spontaneous utterance. Many people will bury their own cases with these while bitching and moaning at their arresting officer on the way to jail. Can you give an example? Years ago, at the end of high school, I had a friend that was working at a shop.
Remember those?
No, he was stealing from the till whenever he was put on a check.
Oh!
Eventually, he is clearly caught on camera, pocketing cash, and the cops are called to arrest him in store when he showed up for his next shift. As he is handcuffed and lead out of the building, he yells, "You guys are idiots. I've been stealing from you for years." Yeah? It didn't go well. Scooby-Doo moment here. I once served as an arbitrator in a hearing where Party 1 was alleging Party 2 committed fraud. An essential element of fraud is the intent to mislead as opposed to error or misunderstanding. Party 2 was admitting to the bad act, but insisted it was accidente and had proof they received the wrong instructions. Party 1 then went on a long rant about how the very action of committing the act was fraud. He would not let his lawyer speak. During a rant, he eventually said something along the lines of, "I know Party 2 didn't do this on purpose." Boom! No intent, then no fraud. Hearing over. It reminded me of the Judge Judy episode, where a young woman was suing 2 guys for stealing her purse. They denied taking it. Judy asked her what was in the purse, and she said something like makeup, gift cards, and headphones. The defendant spoke up and said, "There weren't any headphones in it, Your Honor." Judy laughed at them and then found in the plaintiff's favor. "Oh my God, is he going to the hospital? Is he gonna be okay?" I was just texting my friend. I never thought it could end up this way. Enjoy the vehicular manslaughter charge. I don't understand. I hit her in my house. Why am I arrested? In my country. Lot of immigrants from primarily Islamic nations come from places where disciplining their wives is normal, or that basically they do whatever they want in their own home. Lots of confusion here. He lied to me and didn't replace my transmission with a new one. He just swapped it out. Of course I'm gonna make him give me my money back. Why isn't he in trouble? He is gonna be in trouble. He is gonna be in trouble and you can sue him. Doesn't mean you're allowed to brandish a gun at him, to force him to give you cash. Goddamn piece of shit. Deserved every cut I gave him. Oh cool, so you admit you cut him up with a knife. Also, it works as an exception to hearsay. If a witness, 911 caller, anyone basically blurts out information. Passenger is heard saying, "Holy shit, we're gonna crash. Slow down." Witness or passerby shouts, "He's crazy, he's throwing bottles at the cashier," etc. This is always kind of funny to me when it comes up on TV shows or movies. Like sometimes I'll watch Law and Order and this comes up. Then the person is like, well, they didn't read me my Miranda rights, so they can't use that against me. Well, yes, they can, because they didn't have reason to read your Miranda rights yet. They didn't even have time to read them to you in some cases. Before I changed careers, I was working in an office, and I had a team of 4 employees I was managing. My boss, who was incredibly dumb, wanted to see what grade I gave to my employees as part of their annual evaluation. I had 4 great employees who were working hard and well, and I could even show them some stuff past their level, telling them it could be useful experience if they wanted to later get a higher paying job at a higher level. Needless to say, their results were much higher than expected, especially for 2 of them. So I gave 2 of them an A and the 2 others a B. My boss disagreed with me, told me how their work has to be especially amazing to deserve such grade. She talks to me about the normal distribution and how there should be X amount of A, B, and C. I let her go. I take back the sheets with their evaluation grades and everything I wrote about them. I ask her what exactly makes them not deserving. She rambles. I ask her what their day-to-day looks like. She rambles some more, getting a bit angry. I ask her what so-and-so last names are. She doesn't even know. I told her if she doesn't know anything about that, she has no clue how they're performing and therefore can't tell me to change it. I asked her what she'd do if the majority of the employees performed well. Will she give out D&E grades just to follow normal distribution? She tells me no, it would be ridiculous. I told her doing the same for A and B would be ridiculous too, and that's what she does. I told her if she wants, she can give me an E, but she won't change the evaluations of my employees, and as soon as I'd leave her office, I'd show them their grades, so they know she's the one who changed them, if it happened to change. Turns out, they kept their A and B. I got a C. I didn't give a shit. I left soon after and changed my career. Never looked back. What a fucking moron she was. Miranda rights only need to be read before interrogation, and only if they are detained. If a suspect chooses to speak unprovoked, police do not need to say anything. Our friend group had one guy I had personally cut off because he was a terrible drunk. Another friend of mine was having a cookout and decided to invite the guy I had cut off, despite me saying he was going to do some stupid shit. Fast forward into 2 hours into the cookout, the friend I had cut off from my life got drunk and decided it'd be funny to sucker punch a guy with Asperger's. Everyone was telling him how big of a piece of shit thing that was to do, but he laughed and shrugged and played it off as no big deal. As the Asperger's guy was holding back tears, I didn't have to do a fucking thing. He showed everyone who he was. Everyone stopped fucking with him after that. Good riddance. Sucks for the dude who got punched though. At least he only hurt the guy. Dude could have ruined his life with 1 punch. Yay, I'm not happy it happened at all. I may have left this part out by accident, but I told the host of the cookout not to invite that fucker like 3 times at least. I worked at a large vape juice manufacturer, printing labels for the bottles. We had a particular production manager who thought she was my boss. She wasn't. We were on the same level of the hierarchy, and thought her stuff was a priority to me. She could not understand that we had a whole process and knew exactly what needed to be printed in what order to fulfill all of our orders. Our boss told me to just do my best to work with her and get her what she requested so she'd shut up. She decided one day to order 150 of each label for 2 particular lines we had so she would never have to wait for labels again. The whole company knew that regulations were changing and requirements on labels were changing. I tried to explain this to her and that I didn't think this was a good plan. She insisted repeatedly. I finally said fuck it and started doing it while having my team do their best to keep up with our actual priority. Stayed late, got lots of overtime. When our boss finally clued into the order, I was 300 labels into 600 of the first line. When asked, I told him that he had told me to do what it takes to make her stop bitching, and that's what I was doing. He put an instant stop to it. She got written up, and those labels were still on a shelf in the corner 3 years later when we shut down. My wife was a school teacher with 20 years under her belt. She was paired with a co-teacher for what we used to call the special ed students. Wife and co-teacher did not get along. It got to the point where wife and co-teacher and their respective bosses were sent to mandated mediation. Near the end of the mediation session, co-teacher asks the mediator, "So what's the next step if this doesn't work?" Turns out the next step is the one without tenure gets let go. Did they stop behaving like an asset? Nope. Co-teacher got reassigned to somebody else the next year, pissed that person off too, and let go.